"We came to share your bed," said the four virgin Apache sisters to the widowed cowboy. John Callahan's cabin sat at the edge of the rolling plains, surrounded by tall grasses that swayed gently in the wind. The sun had just begun its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a quiet place, far from towns and neighbors, where the only sounds came from the whistle of the wind and the distant calls of wild birds. John had chosen this isolation after the loss of his wife, hoping that the emptiness would soothe the ache in his heart. But solitude had its own kind of weight, and the house that once felt peaceful now often felt too quiet. He moved about the cabin with a steady rhythm, feeding the few chickens that pecked around the yard, and checking the supplies in his small storeroom. The life of a widowed cowboy was simple and predictable, marked by chores, the rising and setting of the sun, and the occasional ride across the plains. Yet even in its simplicity, John had found a strange comfort in routine. Each day was a small reassurance that life could continue, even after loss. That evening, as the wind whispered across the plains, a sudden sound broke the calm, a faint rustling near the edge of the woods. John paused, hand resting on the handle of his old rifle, and listened. It was an unusual sound, soft footsteps over dry leaves. He squinted toward the trees, but the setting sun cast long shadows that made it hard to see clearly. For a moment, his mind conjured stories of bandits or wild animals, though neither had troubled him in years. The rustling grew closer, and then, almost as if stepping from the shadows themselves, 4 figures emerged. They were young women, barely more than girls, dressed in simple garments that looked handmade. Their eyes were wide and alert, scanning their surroundings with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Their hair was dark, pulled back into neat braids, and their faces carried a seriousness that belied their youth. John's first instinct was caution. Strangers were not often found wandering this far from town, and 4 young women alone was highly unusual. Yet something in their movements spoke of desperation rather than danger. One of them, the eldest by a small margin, stepped forward, raising her hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "We need shelter," she said, her voice clear and firm. John noticed the accent, different from the few settlers he had encountered.
"We have nowhere to go."
John studied them closely, taking in their weary expressions and the way they clung to each other. Something in their eyes, the quiet strength beneath the fear, told him they had endured hardships he could only imagine. He lowered his rifle slowly. But you're far from anywhere. You can stay for the night, he said, but I need to know your names. The eldest nodded, and one by one they introduced themselves. Nayeli, the oldest, was just 19, with a calm voice and a determined air. Her sisters followed, Aponi, Talis, and Yuma. Each name sounded foreign to John, soft and musical, unlike anything he had known in his own life. They spoke briefly of their journey, hinting at troubles with other settlers and the pressures that had driven them from their home. John didn't press for details, sensing that what they needed most was safety, not questions. The cabin was small but sturdy. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen area, and a fireplace that warmed the room in the cold evenings. John guided the sisters inside, offering blankets and simple meals of bread and stew. The air was filled with the smell of cooked meat and fresh bread, and the warmth of the fire made the cabin feel less like a frontier outpost and more like a sanctuary. As they settled, the eldest spoke again, her tone direct. "We came to share your bed," she said. John froze, his mind trying to grasp her words. For a long moment, he thought he had misunderstood. The phrase echoed in the quiet cabin, strange and shocking. Seeing his confusion, Nayeli quickly explained, her voice gentle. "We mean only to share warmth. The nights are cold, and we have no place to rest." "We mean no harm." Relief washed over John, and he felt a small, embarrassed laugh escape him. It was a misunderstanding, but it also revealed the courage of these girls, who had approached a stranger with honesty rather than fear. He nodded.
"Very well," he said. "You will have a place near the fire."
"That is all I can offer for now." The sisters smiled faintly, their relief visible in the softening of their eyes. As the night grew darker, they gathered near the hearth, sharing blankets and quietly talking among themselves. John watched them for a moment, noticing how carefully they moved, how they respected the space he had offered. Their presence was unexpected, yet it brought a warmth to the cabin that John had not felt in years.
Over the next hours, John found himself observing them closely.
There was a kind of quiet strength in each sister, a resilience that spoke of survival and wisdom beyond their years. They spoke little of the past, but when they did, it was in fragments. Stories of long journeys, of distant lands, of people they had lost along the way. Their voices were soft, yet there was a firmness in their words that left no doubt they were capable of enduring hardships that would have broken many others. By midnight, the cold outside had deepened, and the fire crackled warmly in the hearth. John noticed that the sisters had arranged themselves around the fire, huddled for warmth and comfort.
He went to his bedroom and checked the blankets, ensuring there was enough for all of them.
It was a small gesture, but one that reflected the cautious care he was beginning to feel for these young women who had walked into his life so unexpectedly. Sleep came slowly for John that night. He lay awake, listening to the quiet breathing of the sisters, the soft creaks of the cabin settling, and the wind whispering across the plains. His mind wandered back to his late wife, to the life they had shared, and to the loneliness that had consumed him since her passing. Yet amidst the memories there was a flicker of something new, a sense of responsibility, of connection, and of the unexpected bonds that could form even in the most unlikely of circumstances.
Outside, the moon rose high, casting silver light across the prairie.
The shadows of the cabin stretched long, merging with the tall grasses and the trees beyond.
Inside, the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the sisters created a fragile but comforting sense of home.
John knew that the days ahead would bring challenges, questions from neighbors, dangers from the frontier, and the task of understanding these four young women who had entered his life so boldly. Yet, for the first time in many years, he felt a sense of anticipation rather than dread. There was a story unfolding here, one that would test his patience, his courage, and his heart. The arrival of the sisters had shifted the rhythm of his life, bringing with them the possibility of companionship, trust, and the rebuilding of a home that had once felt permanently broken. Morning came slowly. The sun broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the plains. The sisters were already awake, moving quietly to prepare for the day. John watched from the doorway, seeing them gather water from the nearby stream, tend to the small garden he had planted, and feed the chickens. Their movements were efficient, graceful, and careful, a reflection of the hardships they had endured and the lessons they had learned along the way. By the time breakfast was ready, a simple meal of eggs, bread, and fruit, the sisters had transformed the cabin into a space of quiet order and life. John joined them at the table, the awkwardness of the first night giving way to a tentative sense of routine. Conversation was slow at first, each word measured, each glance cautious. Yet with time, laughter began to seep into their interactions, a soft, gentle sound that brought warmth to the cold morning air. As the day unfolded, John realized that the presence of the sisters had changed more than just the dynamic of the cabin. They had brought a sense of purpose back into his life, reminding him that connection, care, and trust were still possible. Though he had been alone for so long, the arrival of Naeli, Aponi, Talise, and Yuma had opened a door to a life that was both unexpected and full of promise. By evening, John knew that this was only the beginning. The journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges. But for now, there was a fragile peace in the cabin, a sense of safety and companionship that neither he nor the sisters had expected to find. The plains stretched endlessly beyond the walls of the home, wild and untamed, yet within the cabin a small world of warmth and connection had taken root. And as the fire burned low that night, John sat quietly, listening to the soft murmur of the sisters as they settled in for sleep. In their presence he found a spark of hope, a reminder that even in the harshness of the frontier, kindness, courage, and trust could still find a place to grow. The journey had begun, and the story of the widowed cowboy and the 4 Apache sisters was only just unfolding. Days passed at John Callahan's cabin, and slowly, a rhythm of life began to emerge. The wind continued to sweep across the plains, rustling the tall grasses. But now, the small cabin was no longer empty. Aeli, Aponi, Talise, and Yuma had made themselves comfortable in the small space, and John had begun to adjust to their presence, though his habits and routines were still firmly his own. The mornings were a quiet affair. John would rise at the first light, lighting the stove and preparing breakfast while the sisters washed their faces with water drawn from the nearby stream. The cabin smelled of eggs frying, fresh bread baking on the iron griddle, and the faint earthy scent of firewood. Despite their youth, the sisters quickly learned the rhythm of the cabin. They carried out chores with precision, feeding the chickens, fetching water, stacking firewood, and cleaning the floors. It was a small but comforting order that John had missed during his long months of solitude. The sisters often worked together, speaking in their soft language, a string of musical words that John could not understand, but listened to with quiet fascination. Patiently, one of them would translate a sentence for him, describing a task or commenting on the weather. He found himself listening more closely, trying to understand not just their words, but the emotion behind them. There was pride, joy, and sometimes sorrow, hints of the lives they had left behind, their family, and their village. By mid-morning, John would saddle his horse, Ranger, and ride out to check the fences that bordered his property, or tend to the small herd of cattle grazing near the hills. Sometimes he would take the sisters with him, teaching them how to guide the animals safely, how to recognize tracks in the earth, or how to spot signs of wild animals nearby.
Nayeli, ever the observant one, absorbed every lesson with quiet determination.
Shh. A pony had a natural instinct for the animals, able to calm a frightened horse or coax a stubborn cow back into the pen. Talise was meticulous with the fences, noticing even the smallest breaks or weak spots, and Yuma, though younger, had a keen eye for anything out of place on the land. The sisters' energy was a stark contrast to John's quiet, measured movements. They brought life into the cabin, their laughter echoing across the plains during simple tasks. It was not loud or careless. It was gentle, a reminder that life could be shared even in hardship. John found himself smiling more often, a small, cautious smile that he had not worn since the days before his wife's passing. Despite the growing comfort, there were moments of tension. John had been living alone for years, and the presence of 4 young women in his home required him to adjust in ways he had not anticipated. His initial awkwardness sometimes showed in his tone or in the way he watched over them. The sisters, for their part, were careful to respect the boundaries of the cabin and John's routines. They shared the space without intruding, careful not to disrupt the order he valued so deeply. It was a delicate balance, a silent negotiation of trust and respect that grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, John rode to the edge of the property to inspect the northern fence. The sun was high, the air dry and warm, and the plains stretched endlessly in every direction. As he worked, he noticed tracks in the dirt, small, hurried footprints that did not belong to his cattle. His instincts sharpened, and he followed the trail with Ranger at a steady pace. The tracks led to the woods at the far edge of his land, where the shadows of the trees provided cover. Cautious but curious, John approached and found the source of the tracks. A lone traveler, a man who appeared tired and hungry, sitting against a tree and nursing a small wound on his arm. John called out to him, keeping his voice calm but firm. The man looked up, relief and fear mingling in his eyes. John dismounted and offered him water and a small piece of bread. "Thank you,"
the man said hoarsely. I didn't know if anyone lived out here. John studied him for a moment, then nodded. You can rest at my cabin for a while. It's a long way from any town, but I'll help you get back on your feet. The encounter reminded John of the fragility of life on the plains. Strangers appeared, sometimes by chance, sometimes by misfortune, and the land could be as unforgiving as it was beautiful. The sisters, hearing about the man when he joined them at the cabin, asked questions with genuine concern, showing empathy and kindness that John had always admired. Their understanding of hardship, born from their own experiences, made them wise beyond their years. Life at the cabin was not without challenges. A few days after the stranger arrived, a small storm swept across the plains. The wind howled and rain fell in thick sheets, testing the integrity of the cabin and the fences. John and the sisters worked tirelessly to secure the animals and strengthen the shelter. They carried buckets of water away from the cabin's foundation and reinforced the doors and windows. Through it all, the sisters remained calm and resourceful, turning what could have been panic into teamwork. Their presence transformed the labor into a shared effort, one that strengthened their bond and brought a sense of accomplishment to the otherwise harsh conditions. As the storm passed and the sun returned, a quiet moment of reflection settled over the cabin. John watched the sisters dry off, tending to their soaked clothes and matted hair. He offered them warm tea, and they sat together near the fire, sharing stories of places they had visited and people they had known. Each tale, brief and simple, carried the weight of experience and the resilience of young women who had faced the world with courage. In the evenings, the cabin became a place of learning and exchange. John taught the sisters how to read maps, track animals, and handle tools safely. In return, they shared their knowledge of the land, the herbs that could heal minor wounds, the patterns of the stars, and the stories of their people. John listened with rapt attention, fascinated by the depth of understanding they possessed. It was not just knowledge of survival, but wisdom shaped by generations, a perspective that challenged his own and expanded his understanding of the world. Despite their differences in culture and upbringing, a shared respect grew between John and the sisters. It was built slowly through acts of trust, mutual support, and quiet recognition of each other's strengths. John began to see them not as strangers or dependents, but as partners in the life he had built on the plains, a family he had never expected to find. The small routines of life also allowed for moments of quiet joy. In the late afternoons, John sometimes played his old harmonica, a soft tune that floated across the open land. The sisters would gather near the door, their heads tilted in curiosity, and soon they would join in, clapping, humming, or singing softly in their own language. Music became a bridge, connecting them through shared rhythms and laughter.
Yet, as comforting as life had become, there were still signs of the wider world's challenges.
Word of the sisters' presence eventually reached nearby settlers, some of whom looked with suspicion upon the 4 young women living with a widowed man. John sensed the judgment in the glances that came from neighboring homesteads, the whispers carried by the wind. Though they had not yet confronted him, he knew that this was only a matter of time. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John gathered the sisters by the fire to speak. He wanted them to understand the realities of the world they now inhabited.
There are people nearby, he said, his voice calm but firm. Some may not understand why you are here.
You must be careful, and we must look out for each other.
Naeli nodded, her eyes serious. We understand. We will stay close and help each other.
Aponi, Talis, and Yuma mirrored her sentiment, their expressions reflecting a shared determination. In that moment, John realized that their courage was not only in facing the hardships of the land, but in confronting the judgments and fears of others. The following days were filled with preparation. John repaired fences, reinforced doors, and taught the sisters basic self-defense skills. They practiced together, moving quietly, learning to trust their instincts and support one another. The exercises were not about fear,
but about readiness. A way to ensure that their small household could face challenges without panic. Despite the practical work, there were still moments of laughter, lightness, and shared wonder. The sisters discovered the joy of simple tasks, collecting wild berries, watching the sun rise over the plains, and marveling at the constellations at night. John found himself drawn into their world of curiosity, seeing the land and its wonders through their eyes. By the time the second week passed, a sense of harmony had settled over the cabin. Tasks were divided naturally, lessons were shared freely, and the presence of the sisters had transformed the home from a place of quiet solitude into a space filled with life, learning, and connection. The initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a bond built on respect, trust, and the shared experience of survival on the plains. John often reflected on the remarkable resilience of Nayeli, Aponi, Talise, and Yuma. They had walked into his life with courage, honesty, and a determination to survive. In return, he offered them safety, guidance, and a home, even if small. Together, they had formed a delicate but enduring family, a household shaped not by blood alone, but by trust, respect, and the shared determination to thrive despite the harshness of the world around them. And as night fell over the plains once more, the cabin glowed softly in the fading light. Inside, the sisters prepared for sleep, sharing blankets and whispering quietly, while John sat by the fire reflecting on the days that had passed. The challenges of the frontier were far from over, and the wider world still held unknown dangers. But within the small walls of the cabin, a new life had begun. One of courage, companionship, and the quiet triumph of human connection. Weeks passed at the cabin, and the rhythm of life became more settled. The days blended into one another, yet each was filled with purpose and small joys. Don Callahan had come to see the sisters not just as guests, but as part of the household, a family forged through trust and shared hardship. Nayeli, Aponi, Talise, and Yuma had grown comfortable with their routines, yet the world beyond the cabin remained unpredictable, a reality John could not ignore. The sisters' presence had brought laughter back into the cabin, but it also introduced lessons in patience and understanding for John.
Each morning they would rise together, preparing for the day with quiet efficiency.
Aponi would fetch water from the stream, her nimble steps barely disturbing the pebbles along the bank. Talise tended to the garden, carefully inspecting each plant, making sure it was free from pests. Yuma helped with the animals, her gentle hands soothing the chickens and guiding the calves. Nayeli oversaw them all, coordinating their tasks with a calm authority that reminded John of the wisdom she carried despite her youth. John himself had adapted his routines to include them. He found joy in teaching, and their eagerness to learn made even the most mundane tasks enjoyable. He showed them how to sharpen tools safely, how to track animals without startling them, and how to mend fences efficiently. The sisters absorbed everything with remarkable attentiveness, often asking thoughtful questions that revealed both curiosity and intelligence. One afternoon, as the sun rose high over the plains, John decided to take the sisters on a ride beyond the hills. He wanted them to experience the broader land he had called home for so many years. Mounted on Ranger, the four girls followed on borrowed horses, laughter bubbling from their lips as the wind whipped through their hair. The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden under the sun, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stand of trees. "This is beautiful," Talise said, her eyes wide as she scanned the horizon. "Not everyone gets to see it like this," John replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips.
"Most people only pass through, never stopping to notice."
The sisters listened in quiet awe, absorbing not just the sights, but the sense of freedom the land offered.
John watched them, realizing that despite their displacement and the hardships they had endured, they still carried the wonder and hope of youth. It reminded him that life, even when difficult, could still hold moments of pure beauty. Their return to the cabin was met with the soft glow of evening. As they dismounted, John noticed a shadow moving near the tree line. His hand instinctively went to the rifle at his side, but the sisters were calm, sensing nothing dangerous in the figure.
A man stepped out from the shadows, older than John, with weathered skin and a face marked by years of labor. "Evening," the man said, his voice steady but cautious. "I'm Marcus, a neighbor. I heard from folks in the next settlement that you've got company." John studied him carefully. Marcus was a tall man, broad-shouldered, and his eyes held a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Yes," John replied. "4 young women. They are safe here." Marcus nodded slowly. "I don't mean trouble."
"I just wanted to warn you, some people might not take kindly to outsiders, especially young women living alone with a man. You might see visitors sooner or later."
John nodded, appreciating the warning. "Thank you." "We'll be careful." That night, John spoke with the sisters about the conversation. "There are people nearby who might not understand why you're here," he explained. "It's important to stay aware but not afraid." Nayeli placed a hand over his. "We are ready, John. We trust you, and we will watch out for one another."
Her voice carried quiet strength, a reassurance that calmed the tension in the room.
Strangers occasionally rode past the cabin, curious or judgmental, and the sisters quickly learned to remain composed. Practical skills, but also how to read the intentions of others, how to communicate through subtle gestures, and how to present themselves with confidence. The lessons went beyond survival. They were lessons in navigating a world that could be both hostile and beautiful. One afternoon, a minor emergency arose when a calf wandered too far from the pen. The sisters worked together, guided by John's instructions to bring it back safely. Yuma's gentle coaxing, Talus's steady guidance, and Eponi's quick thinking ensured the animal returned unharmed. They ably coordinated the effort, ensuring that each sister contributed effectively.
The incident became a lesson in teamwork, reinforcing their bond and building trust between them and John.
Evenings were times for storytelling.
Around the fire, the sisters shared tales from their childhoods, stories of family, traditions, and festivals they had celebrated before displacement. John listened, fascinated by the depth of culture and the wisdom woven into each story. In return, he told stories of the plains, of long rides, cattle drives, and the people he had known. These exchanges were not mere entertainment. They were bridges between cultures, between past and present, and between strangers who had become family. Breaths. As time passed, John noticed subtle changes in the sisters. They grew more confident in their surroundings, more adept at handling the land and its challenges. They laughed more freely, and their curiosity extended to learning more about the stars, the seasons, and the patterns of the wildlife around them. Their presence transformed the cabin from a place of survival into a home filled with learning, laughter, and the quiet assurance that they were not alone. Yet life on the plains was never without tension. One morning, while checking the perimeter of the property, John spotted a group of men in the distance. They were riding toward the cabin, their intentions unclear but their gaze fixed and determined. John hurried back, alerting the sisters and ensuring the animals were secure. He instructed them to stay inside, close the doors, and keep quiet until he could assess the situation. As the men approached, John stepped outside to meet them. They were settlers from nearby homesteads, men curious about the 4 young women living with a widowed man. Their questions were polite but probing, tinged with suspicion. John answered calmly, asserting the sisters' right to safety and shelter, emphasizing that no laws were being broken. The conversation was tense but brief. The men eventually left, seemingly satisfied that no threat existed. The incident, however, left a mark on the household. John realized that while the sisters were safe within the cabin, the world outside remained unpredictable and occasionally unkind. It reinforced the lessons of vigilance, trust, and the importance of unity within the household. Even with these challenges, moments of warmth persisted. One evening, after a long day of chores and teaching, John found the sisters outside. sitting on a small hill overlooking the plains. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of red and gold. They invited him to join, and together they watched as the colors shifted and deepened, the horizon stretching endlessly before them. "This is our home," Nayeli said softly, her eyes reflecting the glow of the sun. "We may be far from where we began, but here we are safe. Here we belong." John felt a lump in his throat, moved by the strength and wisdom in her words. He had thought he understood solitude, but he had never known belonging until now. The presence of the sisters had reshaped his understanding of family, trust, and love. Not romantic love, but the deep, sustaining love that comes from shared experience and mutual care. The nights continued to hold their own quiet magic. After chores and meals, they would gather near the fire. John would strum his harmonica while the sisters sang softly or hummed melodies from their childhood. The music wove through the cabin, mingling with the crackle of the fire, creating a sense of comfort and continuity. In these moments, the harshness of the plains, the uncertainties of life, and the worries about outsiders all faded into the background. Through it all, bonds deepened. The sisters began to see John not just as a protector, but as a friend, mentor, and part of their newfound family. He, in turn, saw in them a resilience and wisdom that inspired him, for together they shared a life of simplicity, challenge, and profound connection, each day reinforcing the unspoken understanding that they were stronger together than alone.
One particularly quiet evening, Nayeli approached John while he was tending the fire.
"John," she said softly, "we are grateful for the home, the safety, and the lessons. You have given us more than we can say." John looked at her, touched by the sincerity in her eyes. "You've given me too," he said. "You've brought life back into this cabin, into my world. We watch out for each other now. That's what matters." The fire flickered, casting shadows across their faces, and in that moment, John understood fully the meaning of trust, of family, and of resilience. The cabin on the plains had become more than a shelter. It was a home, a place where courage, care, and shared experience created bonds that could not be broken by time, distance, or adversity. And so, life continued. The days were filled with work, learning, and quiet pleasures. The nights brought stories, music, and reflection. The sisters and John grew inseparable, each finding in the other a source of strength, comfort, and hope. The challenges of the plains remained, but within the walls of the cabin, a sense of belonging and unity flourished. A bond that would carry them through whatever the world might bring next. Desperate.
Life at the cabin had settled into a comfortable rhythm, but John Callahan knew that life on the plains was never without surprises. He had grown accustomed to the presence of Nayeli, Apache, Talase, and Yuma, and the sisters had become integral to every part of his daily life.
They moved with quiet confidence, their laughter echoing softly across the plains, and their small acts of kindness, tending to the animals, keeping the cabin warm, preparing meals, had transformed the once lonely home into a place of life and warmth. Yet John could sense that challenges would not stay far away forever. The nearby settlers had begun to watch the cabin more closely, whispers spreading about the unusual household.
John had prepared the sisters, teaching them not only how to care for the land and animals, but also how to stay composed when facing strangers.
They had practiced quietly, with subtle gestures and careful observation, learning the art of vigilance without fear.
One morning, John noticed unusual activity in the distance. A group of riders approaching swiftly. His heart quickened, but he stayed calm, signaling the sisters to be ready. The men arrived at the cabin, dismounting with purpose. John stepped forward, his presence firm but non-threatening. The settlers, armed with curiosity and a hint of suspicion, questioned him about the sisters' presence. "They are safe here," John stated firmly, his voice steady. "No one is in danger, and no law is being broken."
The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected a confrontation but found only resolve.
After a brief discussion, they turned back, leaving John and the sisters to their home. The incident was a reminder that the world beyond the cabin remained unpredictable, but it also strengthened their bond. Together, they had faced fear and uncertainty and had emerged united.
In the days that followed, life continued, but John noticed a change in the sisters.
They were no longer simply learning from him. They were teaching him, too. Nayeli's patience and wisdom, Aponi's keen observation, Talisa's careful planning, and Yuma's gentle intuition offered John new ways of seeing the land, the animals, and the tasks that had once seemed routine. He realized that their presence was not just a comfort. It was a source of growth and understanding. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the plains, John decided to take the sisters on a longer ride. He wanted them to see the distant hills, the winding river, and the open sky stretching beyond the horizon. Mounted on their horses, they rode together, the wind carrying their laughter and the sound of hooves over the soft earth. "This is wonderful," Aponi said, her eyes sparkling as she looked at the distant river. "It feels like the world is bigger than we imagined." John smiled. "The plains are full of surprises," he said, "and there's always more to learn. Keep your eyes open, your minds alert, and you'll find beauty and danger in equal measure."
The ride strengthened their connection not just to the land but to each other.
They shared stories along the way, tales from the sisters' childhood, memories of distant relatives, and John's recollections of his own youth. Each story, simple yet meaningful, wove them closer together, a tapestry of shared experience and mutual respect. Back at the cabin, evening brought another challenge. A sudden storm swept across the plains, heavy rain and strong winds testing the strength of the cabin and the fences. John and the sisters worked together tirelessly, securing animals, reinforcing the roof, and ensuring that the cabin remained a safe refuge. The storm was fierce, yet their combined effort and calm determination saw them through. After the storm passed, the cabin smelled of wet earth, smoke, and damp wood. The sisters helped John dry out supplies, hang clothes to air, and check the animals for injuries. Despite exhaustion, their spirits remained high, buoyed by the knowledge that they had faced the challenge together. John felt a deep sense of pride in them, not just for their resilience, but for the way they had embraced the life he had shared with them. As the nights grew calmer, the household settled into a peaceful routine. They spent evenings around the fire sharing simple meals, playing soft music, and talking about their hopes for the future. John sometimes brought out his harmonica, the notes floating through the cabin, blending with the sisters' soft humming. These moments were not grand or dramatic, but they were filled with a quiet magic, a sense of home, safety, and belonging that had been missing from John's life for many years. One evening, Nayeli approached John quietly, holding a small bundle of herbs. "These may help with the cough you've had," she said, her voice gentle and kind. She had learned the properties of local plants from her mother and elders, and her knowledge now helped care for the household. John took the herbs, grateful not only for the medicine but for the thoughtfulness behind it. "Thank you," he said softly. "Your wisdom has kept us safe in many ways." The sisters' presence had transformed John. He had come to appreciate not only their skills and intelligence, but also their empathy, humor, and courage. Each day with them reminded him that life could be rebuilt after loss, that trust and connection were possible even in the harshest of places. The cabin, once a lonely refuge, had become a place of laughter, learning, and shared hope. As winter approached, John knew that the challenges of the season would test them further. Snow, icy winds, and shorter days required preparation and foresight. Together, they stocked the cabin with firewood, preserved food, and ensured the animals were sheltered. The sisters learned quickly, their skills growing with each task. John marveled at their resilience, recognizing that they were not only surviving but thriving in ways that he had not anticipated. In the quiet moments, John reflected on the journey that had brought them together. He thought of his late wife, of the grief that had once consumed him, and of the unexpected arrival of Nayeli, Aponi, Talise, and Yuma. They had walked into his life boldly, with honesty and courage, and had reshaped it entirely. He had learned patience, understanding, and the quiet power of shared experience. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John and the sisters sat on the porch of the cabin. The sky glowed in shades of orange and pink, the wind carrying the scent of pine and earth. They were silent for a moment, absorbing the beauty of the world around them.
Then Nayeli spoke. "We are grateful," she said softly.
Desperate. For this home, for safety, and for the life we have found here. You have given us more than we can say. John looked at her, his heart full. And you have given me something I thought I would never have again, he replied. You have brought life, laughter, and family into this cabin. We look out for each other now, and that is what matters most. The sisters nodded, understanding the depth of his words. It was not about ownership or control, but about trust, respect, and care. They had become a family in the truest sense, not through blood but through shared experiences, challenges, and love. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, the cabin glowed warmly against the cold. Inside, the sisters prepared for the night, tending to the fire and ensuring the animals were safe. John watched them quietly, feeling a profound sense of peace. The world outside could be harsh and unpredictable, but within these walls, they had created a sanctuary of trust, courage, and hope. In the following weeks, life continued with the quiet rhythms of work, learning, and companionship. The cabin, once a lonely place of solitude, had become a home filled with laughter, music, and shared purpose. The sisters and John had weathered challenges together, storms, strangers, and the uncertainties of frontier life. But their bond had only grown stronger. One afternoon, John found himself reflecting on the journey that had begun with the sudden arrival of 4 sisters at his cabin. He remembered the first evening, their timid voices asking for shelter, and the startling words, "We came to share your bed." What had started as a misunderstanding had blossomed into something far greater, a family built on trust, courage, and mutual care. Sisters had grown in confidence, skill, and understanding. They had adapted to life on the plains while teaching John to see the world through their eyes. Together, they had faced challenges, shared joys, and built a life that neither could have imagined alone. As night fell over the cabin once more, John and the sisters gathered by the fire. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scent of pine and snow. They shared a quiet meal, told simple stories, and listened to the soft notes of John's harmonica blending with the sisters' gentle humming. In that moment, the cabin was more than a shelter. It was a home, a place of safety, connection, and belonging. And as the fire burned low, John knew that whatever challenges the plains might bring, they would face them together. They had found in each other trust, courage, and family. Life would continue, full of work, laughter, and learning. And the bonds they had forged would endure through every season, storm, and sunrise. The story of John Callahan and the 4 Apache sisters had reached a point of quiet triumph, a life rebuilt from loss, hardship, and uncertainty, sustained by the simple yet profound power of human connection. The plains stretched endlessly before them, wild and untamed, but within the cabin they had created a world of warmth, trust, and hope. A world where family was chosen, courage was shared, and life, in all its beauty and challenge, could flourish.